Ich werde den Vortrag auf Englisch machen, einfach damit ich schneller durch das Material komme. Ich arbeite eigentlich nur in Englisch, bin auch in Südafrika, Kanada, erst seit 2 Jahren in der Schweiz. Seit 2008 spätestens ist uns klar, we need a version 2 of the financial system. And what is it that drives this? It's clear that economics always wins. Economics always wins. For example, technologies throughout history, gunpowder, the printing press and so on, change the fundamental economics of resources and challenges. And that drives what happens in society. It changes the geopolitics of how things operate, and it changes politics. So, and a recent example is the Arab Spring Revolution in the Arab world, which was a combination of mobile phones with social networks. That changed the dynamics of how communication happens, changed the economics, and governments changed because of that. So why did I found Monetas? As you heard in the introduction, I grew up in South Africa, and during the apartheid era, 1970s, and we had lots of problems, and I became sensitized at a young age to doing something about these problems. And initially I thought that the way to do it is through politics, developing a better constitution and so on. And gradually over time it became clear to me that politics is not an effective way. It takes forever, and you have to negotiate with people, and basically nobody gets what they want. So gradually I came to the insight the way to change things is through technology. And then a few years ago I asked myself, which technologies would have the biggest impact? What technologies could help really change things? And I came to the conclusion that the financial system is at the core of everything. And today's financial system is very centralized, which leads to abuse of power. And even if there's no abuse of power, if there's just a wrong decision made, because it's centralized, everybody suffers. And as we know in Switzerland, which is the most decentralized country in the world, politically decentralized country, the decentralization in Switzerland protects against abuse of power and also against bad decisions. If the canton of Zug makes a bad decision, the canton of Zurich does not suffer from it. So decentralization is the key thing. So I asked myself, what kind of technology could you develop that would help to decentralize the financial system? The other conclusion that I came to is that wealth creation is the fundamental driver of social and individual well-being. When we face problems, that costs money to solve them. If you want to have a better environment, you need money to create better environmental results. If you want to solve health issues and education issues, it costs money. So the wealthiest countries have the best education systems, the best environmental record, and so on. And the poorest countries struggle with these issues, not because they don't know how to do it, but because they don't have money. So we need to focus on how do we create wealth. And the 4 fundamental drivers of wealth are secure property rights, low transaction costs, a big economic network, and division of labor and specialization. And I'll just give one short focus on this. The second point, efficient trade. This is something that economists have been focusing on just in the last number of years. Historically, we focused on production costs, but in the last few years, economists have realized that trading costs are even more important than production costs. For example, they believe now that the Industrial Revolution started in England and not in France and Germany and other countries, because England at that time had the lowest transaction costs, which allowed people to easily trade with each other. And when you can trade with each other easily and cheaply, then people can have specialization and division of labor. And some people specialize in invention and building new products and services. And then you have the Industrial Revolution. And the reason the Soviet Union collapsed is because they had high transaction costs. We could talk about this in more detail, but fundamentally, transaction costs are key to driving wealth creation. We need to find ways to reduce transaction costs. Secondly, economic network size. It's very important to be part of a large economic network. If you had a small group of people that are very talented, the brightest people in the world, but it's just a small group of, let's say, 30 people, they would be desperately poor, even in spite of their talent. To be able to have wealth creation is driven through a large group of people that can specialize, and through that specialization you improve productivity, and through productivity you create wealth. So it's important to be connected to a large economic network. And as you can see here, today we still have a long way to go. Most countries do not have access to formal financial services. In Asia, 60% of the people do not have access to formal financial services. In South America, 65%, and in Africa, 80% do not have access to the global financial system, which means they are reduced to a small community of doing cash face-to-face transactions, and that keeps them poor. Enter the new technology of crypto finance. Crypto finance addresses all four fundamental drivers of wealth creation. It helps to secure property rights, it reduces trading costs, it enables division of labor and specialization, and it connects people to the global economy. And as a result, crypto finance will lead to the greatest explosion of wealth creation that we've ever seen. So let's look at the crypto finance ecosystem. And to understand the crypto finance ecosystem, we need to look at the social ecosystem, the fundamental structure of society. There's basically two categories that we need to look at. The one is the basic rules of the game. For example, do we drive on the left side of the road or the right side of the road? And what are the laws that apply in that country? Those types of decisions need to be done as a consensus. And as we know in Switzerland, you have a referendum about it, and then you come to a decision. The majority votes a certain direction, and that creates the framework that the society operates in. But doing those consensus decisions is very expensive. It doesn't work for day-to-day transactions. If I want to do a business deal with somebody, or I want to go to the supermarket to buy some groceries, I don't need the whole country to vote about it. I just need to agree with the other party. The buyer and the seller agree, and it's nobody else's business. So you have these two categories: consensus decisions that set the framework for the game, and then the game itself that's played between different parties, and only the parties involved need to efficiently agree. And this also applies within the crypto finance ecosystem. You have two types of technologies: consensus technologies and contract technologies. And the ones that we hear about in the news today are technologies like Bitcoin and Ethereum. Those are consensus technologies. So that's one half of the ecosystem. The other types are, for example, what my company develops, a contract system, which does very efficient transactions between people. So the advantage of consensus systems is that they can be used to take community decisions. They can be used for uncensorable records. For example, if you register your physical property, your real estate, you can do that on the blockchain. Or you can do elections using blockchains. For example, the country of Denmark, 2 years ago, one of the parties used the blockchain as a secure electronic voting system. But because the consensus systems need everybody to vote, they are not efficient. They are very expensive and slow. And the transactions on blockchains like Bitcoin are public. Now that's good for some things that need to be publicly audited, but it's not good for day-to-day transactions. We want privacy for day-to-day transactions. And that's exactly in those areas where contract systems are good. Contract systems, because they only involve the trading parties, not everybody in the country, can be done very efficiently and very quickly, and they enable privacy. So these two types of technologies are complementary. You need both. Just like in a society, you need the rules of the game, and then you play the game. Within the crypto finance ecosystem, you need consensus technologies that give basic infrastructure, and then you need contract technologies to efficiently do transactions. So this is how it looks. Ideally, you store assets, including digital assets, on consensus systems, So that's the asset layer. And then you do efficient transactions in a contract system. So that's the transaction layer. And when you combine the asset layer with the transaction layer, you have a complete ecosystem. So looking at the transaction business, we already heard in the beginning that for small transactions, people generally use cash. Now, interestingly, in poor countries, like here we've got a Kenyan warrior, 80% of the transactions are less than $5, and 50% are less than $1. Now that sounds very small, but even in countries like Switzerland, rich countries, the average transaction size in Switzerland is 27 francs. That's very small. And the problem is that virtually all transaction systems are very expensive for small transactions because they have high minimum fees. They generally have minimum fees of about 20 to 30 cents, plus another 3% on top. For example, I had a friend recently do a PayPal transaction. We talked about this. So he said, well, let me see. And he did a PayPal transaction for $1. Guess what it cost him? $1.58. 58% charge to do a $1 transaction. So obviously, people are not going to use these. So no surprise. So why should we care whether people use cash or not? Well, cash is very expensive. There's the perception that cash is free, but the reality is it's very expensive. It's cheap compared to credit cards, but it's very expensive if you look at what's possible with today's technology. In developed countries, the cost of cash is between 1% and 2% of GDP. That's a massive cost. We could go from recession to growth just by eliminating this cost. And in developing countries, it's even higher. It's 5 to 7% of GDP, just the cost of cash. And the other thing is that the unbanked, who do not have access to financial services, formal financial services, lose between 15 and 25% of their savings every year. I'd rather pay low taxes here in Switzerland than to lose 15 to 25% of my money every year. So the transaction platform that we've developed is the first platform, the first system that is not just competitive with cash, but cheaper than cash. A lot cheaper than cash. And it requires no bank account, and it offers instant settlement. So let's talk about cash for a second, because there are these terms about cash and a cashless society. A cashless society one of the fundamental characteristics of cash is that it's held by the individual, by the user. Whereas a cashless system would mean that you have an account that's held by a third party somewhere else. So cash is not defined by the fact that it's paper. You can create digital cash that's held by the user, and then it's still cash. It's just cash in a digital form. So what we've made possible is digital legal tender. This is a very important innovation. You can use cryptocurrencies, but you can also, on a platform like Monetas, have a central bank issue the national currency as digital legal tender in a digital system. So then the user still has it in their digital wallet. It's not held by a third party. It's real digital tender in your digital wallet. So what are transactions? Transactions are fundamentally contracts. It's two or more parties that agree to do a deal. So it's contract. So transaction systems are contracting platforms, contracting systems. And what we've built at Monetas is a universal contracting platform. You can do any type of transaction in the Monetas system, any type of contract, from simple payments all the way to derivatives and sophisticated financial instruments. And cash and different kinds of currency are also just types of financial instruments. So you can issue any type of financial instrument, including any type of currency, conventional like the Swiss franc, the US dollar, and so on, and cryptocurrencies or commodity currencies like gold currencies can be issued in these digital systems. And there's a further important point. There's been a breakthrough in the last number of years that makes possible truly standardized financial contracts. The same financial instrument, the same contract, regardless whether you are in China using Chinese language, or in New York using English, or in Switzerland using German, it's not dependent on a lawyer. The same standardized contract works exactly the same on every platform. This will lead to a dramatic simplification and reduction of risk. And today we have the mobile phone, the world's first global distribution platform. So combining the mobile phone with these new crypto finance technologies means that we can take the most advanced financial services to everybody in the world that has a mobile phone. And today, people in developing countries all have mobile phones. They go barefoot rather than not have a phone. They all have mobile phones. And smartphones today just cost $5. So people don't buy feature phones anymore. When they buy phones today, they buy smartphones. So all of this will lead to a radical transformation of our financial systems and our social systems, and an explosion of wealth creation. Now, let me highlight one very important trend. If you look right through history, there's been a trend from fragmented systems to integrated systems. And what we're seeing in the last number of years is a further step in that direction, the rise of global platforms. For example, Airbnb is a platform that allows people anywhere in the world to share their accommodation. And hotels and traditional businesses are feeling the result of this. Uber is a global platform to share cars, to get rides. And there's many more examples of this. Facebook is a global platform to share social messages and videos and so on. So what does this mean? This means that for finance, there's a disintermediation, a loss of power. These platforms are going to be the dominant thing because the internet technology is inherently global. So whoever achieves network effects becomes dominant in that particular area. And the traditional providers will run their business on these platforms. Today you have hotels that use Airbnb to sell their hotel rooms. And you have taxi companies that use Uber to sell their taxi services. And traditional financial institutions are going to use the financial platforms of the future to provide their financial services. So this leads to a fundamental change in the balance of power. Also, what we will see in the future is a single global cryptocurrency that takes over as the world's dominant currency. We've always had as I said in the beginning, economics always wins. And it's efficient to have a single currency for global trade. In the past, we've always had this. We've had, most recently, it's the US dollar. Before that, it was the British pound. Before that, it was the Spanish currency, then the Byzantine currency, and so on. At any given point in time, there's one dominant currency. And because of the efficiency of these new cryptocurrencies, we will see a single cryptocurrency become the dominant currency in the future. And then you'll have lots of niche currencies, just like we have today. Frequent flyer miles are a type of currency, and so on. And you'll have local currencies as well. Furthermore, central banks will disappear. This will not happen overnight. Amazon started in 1995. That's 21 years ago. And today we still have bookstores. But some major bookstore chains in the United States, like Borders Books, have disappeared. So these things take time. You will not see central banks disappear overnight. It may take 20 years, but sooner or later they will be gone. They will either disappear or they will privatize. There's a role, we can talk about that later, for central banks to use their position of trust, like the Swiss National Bank can use that to become a private issuer. And yes, we will see a cashless society, but we have to be careful how we define cashless. Cashless in the sense of no more paper cash, but we will see digital cash because people do want control over their currency. Sweden is an example of a very high trust society, so people don't mind trusting third parties and institutions, but most of the world does not have that level of trust, and people still want control of their money. So we will see a move to digital cash. We will also, as a result, see smaller, shorter business cycles. As central banks lose the ability to make monetary policy, we won't have these gigantic, very destructive business cycles. We'll see short, small business cycles like we had in the 19th century and before. And we will see accurate pricing of risk. Today, the whole risk model is completely upside down. Nobody has a real idea what the real risk in the financial system is, because central banks with the negative interest rate policy are completely destroying the signaling of risk in the market through interest rates. So as they lose power and as these new systems gain ground, and of course, as I said earlier, this will take time, this will take many years, but as these new technologies take over, you'll have lots of competing systems, and they will have a kind of crowd intelligence like we have in the market, supply and demand, and you'll see again an accurate pricing of risk and real, genuine interest rates. Here's a statistic. The Banco Santander did a study that just looked at blockchain technologies, which is one element of the crypto finance space. And they said if we roll out blockchain technologies within the banking services, the banking sector can save $20 billion a year in costs. So these are not trivial amounts. This is something very important to look at. And if you look at the entire crypto finance space, the savings are much bigger. As I mentioned earlier, big percentages of GDP just for the cost of cash. Now, this is not bad news for the financial industry. Those players that are willing to innovate and embrace these technologies can use them as an opportunity to grow their market share and to provide new services that are not possible today. They can dramatically cut their costs, and by being proactive, they can build their brand, because the only thing they'll have in the future is their brand and the trusted relationships they have. They know they can no longer rely on pricing power. They will have to have superior services. But with these new technologies, they can reach new customer segments. For example, a bank in Switzerland that has a good brand could leverage that brand and get customers in Africa or Asia or South America without building expensive brick and mortar infrastructure. There's also a lot of talk about the threat from global tech giants like Apple Pay. I don't really see Apple Pay as a threat, provided that we move fast enough and we establish a genuine open platform that all the existing providers can participate on. For example, the Swiss National Bank could issue the Swiss national currency, the franc, on a platform like Monetas, and this would enable all the different players to use this platform and continue to exist, and Apple Pay would have no chance. But we need to move quickly. Implications for government. These technologies and the services that will be built with these technologies will lead to disintermediation for government as well. Lots of services that government provides today will be provided privately, and there'll be a loss of power. Traditional taxes will be replaced by land tax. This is a big topic. I'm just mentioning it. But traditional taxes like income tax and transaction taxes are not efficient. They cost a lot of money. They're very invasive to privacy. And I said economics always wins. Traditional taxes are bad economics. But there's an efficient tax that cannot be evaded, regardless of technology, and that's a land tax. That's the original tax we started with. And government will be transformed into proprietary community. In other words, they'll become basically a real estate manager that provides services to their citizens. Switzerland is already 2/3 on the way there, so further along than most countries, and we can talk about that in questions. The implications for society are that there'll be increasing decentralization, a demonopolization, and a democratization. In other words, better access to all these different services, and people will be integrated in the global economy, the people that are not integrated today, and as a result we'll see an explosion of wealth creation and science and technology, and simultaneously a reduction of violence, which we've seen right through history, but this will be accelerated with modern technologies. So bottom line, a dramatically higher quality of life. I'm very optimistic about this next few decades that we're going into. Thank you very much.